Hello and welcome to the next edition of Luck at the Cup. As you can see, and sharp-eyed observers amongst you will notice, we have picked up and moved our tack from Santa Anita to Keeneland. And I've got more great guests for you over the next couple of episodes. A little bit later on in this episode, I will be talking to one of the most esteemed veterinarians and most knowledgeable people in the sport of thoroughbred racing, Dr. Kathleen Anderson, past president of the Association of American Equine Practitioners. But first up, a popular and enormously successful racehorse trainer. He began in England, where he grew up in Newmarket, the headquarters of British racing. He came here to the United States at 16. He was assistant to the great Jonathan Shepherd, and he has subsequently forged an extremely distinguished career. He won the Kentucky Derby with Animal Kingdom in 2011, and he has developed something of a reputation as a giant killer in Breeders' Cup races, because in addition to the great main sequence Turf Horse of the Year in 2014, he slayed some tall reputations with the very popular Better Talk Now many years earlier in 2004, and with Shared Account in 2010. I am talking, of course, of my first guest today on Luck at the Cup, Graham Motion. Graham, great to talk to you, great to have you with us today, and things are going very well for you still.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And when you were growing up watching horse racing in Newmarket as a child, was training always on the agenda?
You know, I had this wild idea at one point of being a jockey, but I wasn't a particularly good rider, and I was going to be way too big, fortunately, so probably wasn't brave enough either. So the next best thing was being a trainer, and I grew up watching the likes of Michael Stout and Henry Cecil saddling horses at Newmarket on a Saturday afternoon. At the time, we could only watch racing on a Saturday afternoon. That was what we did. Because
there were sort of 3 TV channels you could watch, and 2 of them normally had horse racing on. So.
Absolutely, and that was kind of a big treat, was to get to watch racing on a Saturday.
And you were based in Newmarket because your parents were involved in the industry.
Yeah, so Mum and Dad had a stud farm called Herringswell, which is now what I call my stable. We lived in a small village, of Herringswell. So very much I was brought up around racing, and my dad worked for Tattersalls and became the American representative for Tattersalls, which is why we eventually came over here.
And so when you came here, how old were you when you first came to the
So I'd just finished O-levels in England, so I was 16,
yeah.
So I did my last 3 years over here.
And do you now think of yourself as an Englishman abroad still, or very much an American?
It depends. It always amuses me around Breeders' Cup time when sometimes the English papers will claim me as one of them. So I kind of like that, actually.
So you do still feel that attachment to the UK?
Look, I'm very American. I have 2 American kids. My family all live over here. But, my roots are still in England. So I'm very proud of that. But no, I'm pretty American, really.
Did your upbringing, though, in England inform the way you trained? Do you train differently because you've had a European background, or not really?
I don't think so, really, because I never was particularly involved in training per se when I grew up. I was too young. I was very obsessed about racing growing up, but never actually worked in a stable. I'd follow my dad around Tattersalls in Newmarket. So my influences were more when I actually got involved over here. And my first job was Jonathan Shepherd, which I always kind of call my 5 years of college after I left high school.
I mean, Jonathan Shepherd has legendary status as a brilliant trainer of steeplechasers and top-class flat horses. What did you learn from him, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, when I first went to work for Jonathan, my dad had suggested I went to work for him because he thought that it would put me off training horses. But I was there for 5 years. It was a phenomenal experience. I mean, I basically learned to ride at Jonathan's. I'd ridden a little bit growing up, but never galloped, which was something I'd always dreamt of doing. I still kind of had this passion for being a jockey. I've always had tremendous respect for jockeys. So Jonathan really got me going. He taught me the basics of what I do now, for sure.
You say you always had tremendous respect for jockeys. Is that something you think we don't have enough of as an industry?
I think so. I think it gets a little bit lost because of the betting. In the sport. I think we're very quick to blame jockeys, perhaps, whereas in other sports, I don't think they probably take quite as much blame. But I don't think people in general appreciate quite what athletes they are and the risks that they take, let's put it that way.
I've always been struck here, as distinct from Europe, that trainers are happier to just take on and off jockeys, and jockeys don't seem to mind too much. Are you someone who likes to maintain consistency where possible?
Yes, I do, but it's very different over here. We tend to stay in one place here, so if you do have an operation like ours, when we train at Fair Hill, we're constantly running at different locations, a little bit more European-like. So it's often hard to keep jockeys on one horse over here.
When you started training, how quickly did you think that you knew what you were doing?
Well, sometimes I still question if I know what I'm doing. Look, I think it's all about confidence. I think you definitely learned as you went along. You learned from your mistakes. I was very fortunate when I first started to have a horse called Gala Spinaway, who was kind of the horse that got my career going. I think once people saw you with a stakes horse, that gave them confidence to send you another good horse. So, I definitely learned a lot in my early years, and I still think you learn to this day. It's not easy. It's not like training athletes where you can actually speak to them after a race or speak to them after a training session. You have to figure out yourself what's going on with the horse without them being able to tell you.
Tell me a bit more about Gala Spinaway. Clearly a horse very close to your heart.
Yes, when I first set out on my own, he was actually laid up on the farm. He'd had an injury, and my boss, Bernie Bond, had trained him. He was a really good 3-year-old, and Bernie's owners had decided to keep the horses with me in my stable in Maryland. And my wife actually used to go out to the farm every day once she got done training with me in the morning and get on him to prepare him to come back to the races. So he was a very special horse to us. He was kind of he was our first big horse.
And then good horses started following.
Absolutely. I think that gave owners confidence to send me other horses, and I became recognized for what he did.
And moving to the Fair Hill Training Centre, which you did in the early 2000s, how big a step was that, having trained on the track in Maryland, to going to a training centre like that?
Well, it was a big step back then because it's not that long ago, but it was almost unheard of for trainers to be successful on a training centre or, let's say, off the racetrack. Michael Dickinson was one of the first to do that. He came over here and, he wasn't training on a racetrack, and he was very successful at it. And I think that kind of started turning things, and then Fair Hill became very successful. Michael Matz had Barbaro, who was trained at Fair Hill. Eventually we had Animal Kingdom. But I think if you'd said 25, 30 years ago that a Derby winner could be trained off the racetrack, I think people would have thought you were crazy.
We'll come to Animal Kingdom in a moment, because that's clearly the defining moment of your career. But I wanted to talk a bit about some of the early Breeders' Cup successes you had, particularly Better Talk Now, who won the Breeders' Cup Turf and then ran in 5 consecutive editions of that race. He must have been an extraordinarily tough customer.
Yeah, he was. And I mean, if Gala Spinaway wasn't the horse that got me started, Better Talk Now was kind of the horse that put me on the map, if you like. It was my first year to go to the Breeders' Cup. We actually went with 2 other horses. We had a filly called Filmmaker, who was very good, and a 2-year-old filly called Danceaway Capote. Filmmaker finished second, and I was very disappointed. I remember Johnny saying to me after the race, he said, "Why are you disappointed? We just finished second in the Breeders' Cup." And I just didn't know I was going to get another chance that day, Better Talk Now was 27, 28 to 1, I think. Had to survive a long inquiry, but it was a phenomenal day. It was my first Breeders' Cup, so it was very special to me.
And just to put it into a bit of context, this is Lone Star Park, the only Breeders' Cup that's been run at Lone Star Park. Filmmaker was second to Ouija Board, one of the sort of Breeders' Cup legends of that period, in her pomp. And Better Talk Now beat Kitten's Joy and Powers Court. It was a decent group of horses you were up against.
Yes, and I was probably a little naive to the competition that we were running against at the time. I don't know how well you remember it, but I think Powers Court made the lead pretty early down the backstretch.
He burst clear down the back.
And helped set the race up for us, and then we survived this long claim of foul. Better Talk Now he was a tricky horse. Ramon had a really good rapport with him, Ramon Dominguez, and that was also his first Breeders' Cup. So for the pair of us, it was a pretty unique day.
And then to keep coming back year in, year out, and it wasn't always a success, but 2 years later at Churchill Downs, he went pretty close to winning another one against Red Rocks.
Yeah, and that was a tough beat, because I think had he won the Breeders' Cup again, he would have really gone down as one of the iconic turf horses. Not that he's not well remembered, but I think that would have put him at a different level. He was a tough horse to watch race because he always came from far off it. He needed a good pace to run at, and he just couldn't quite get to Red Rocks that day. That was a tough, you remember defeats in this game like you remember the wins, and that was one of the tough defeats that I remember.
how do you take it personally when things don't go your way?
I think, the longer you've been doing it, the more accustomed you get to handling it. You prepare yourself to handle the ups and downs. As you well know, the highs are very high and the lows are very low. But I think, you put so much into these big days like the Breeders' Cup. When you start thinking about running in these races 2 months out, there are so many things that it's going to take to get you there in good shape. So, whether you win or whether you'll finish second, the exhilaration is extraordinary, I think.
And it struck me that your first trip there was 2004, and you'd already built up a fair level of success before that. Do you think we underestimate how hard it is just to get any horse to this event?
Yeah, I think it is. And I feel incredibly lucky that I think I've been back to the Breeders' Cup almost every year since. I almost take it for granted, which it's just not that easy to get there. And, to me, it's always been a goal for me. You try throughout the year to pick out horses that are going to get you to the Breeders' Cup, because that's where I want to be in November, is in the Breeders' Cup.
You sprang a massive surprise, as I said, in 2010 in the filly and mare turf. Just tell me a bit about that race and shared account.
Oh, it was a great day. It was at Churchill. Shared Account had actually been beaten and ran very poorly in the Flower Bowl as the lead-up to the Breeders' Cup, her prep race. She actually got loose the day before the Breeders' Cup. She got spooked by some kids running up and down some bleachers as we were waiting to go on the turf course. And she was the kindest filly, never put a foot out of line. So it was so uncharacteristic for her to act up. And actually, Bill Mott caught her on his pony very quickly, so she didn't get to run around or anything. I remember very clearly that win that day. She had just an amazing trip with Edgar. And to beat Midday, a filly that was trained by Henry Cecil, who, had grown up as being one of my idols. I grew up watching Henry Cecil saddle horses. That's what got me into the game.
And at Midday was the defending champ as well. She'd won
yes.
in 2009. What do you remember about Henry that day? Did you talk to him after the race?
No, I don't think, to be honest, I didn't have that kind of relationship with him. I don't think I would have even dared to go up and talk to him, to be honest. I had always respected him. I'd always followed his training, followed his horses. But, certainly I wouldn't have had the relationship where I could have just walked up to him and said, "Hey, Henry, what do you think?" That would have been just somewhere I wouldn't have gone.
What was it about him that you were so awestruck by?
I just think when I was growing up, he was the guy that had the really good horses that you knew about as a kid. And he was very flashy. He was, very well dressed. He was, I think, like you grow up watching a manager of a football club, Henry was the guy that I followed because he just had this amazing team and just tremendous amount of respect about him and the way he did things.
Do you enjoy the lifestyle of being a trainer? Because it's not just a job, is it?
No, it isn't. And I think, it's funny you say that because when I first left high school, I went to work on a breeding farm in France called Luminy, where actually Francois Boutin spent time there. So a lot of quite well-known people had spent time at Luminy. And it was there that I really got interested in racing because the farm life, the monotony of waiting to bring the horses in at the end of the day was just, to me, it was very, it just didn't really interest me. But I started to get involved in the training, which was very exciting. It was, we had 2-year-olds there at Luminy, and it was just a much more fast-moving part of the business, and that's what attracted me to it. And I still think to this day, you enjoy the adrenaline of racing on a Saturday or being at the races and, just training a good horse up to a big race. It's a rush.
If you are of a sort of naturally sort of introverted temperament or you're somebody who doesn't particularly enjoy the social side of it, that, I would imagine, would make life pretty difficult.
Yes, and I think we do. I think Anita and I do enjoy that. It is very social, and I think we appreciate the relationships that we've formed and that our kids have formed from growing up in racing. It's a little less social perhaps here than it is in Newmarket or in Lambourne, But definitely that's part of the game, and we enjoy those relationships.
And in terms of being pretty itinerant, so you're moving your horses around the country. I know you're based at Fair Hill, but you've got stables of horses all over the shop, and you've got horses running down in Florida, or horses in Maryland, horses in Kentucky, horses in New York, the odd horse in California. How is that to manage on a day-to-day basis?
Well, you hear people say it all the time, but it takes a good team. I mean, I have my assistant, Adrian Rolls, has been with me since I started. Actually, since before I started. Adrian worked for me when I was with Bernie Bond, who turned over the horses to me when he retired. So I think that's a pretty unique relationship to have had an assistant that's been with me since day one.
Amazing.
And when we started, it was Adrian, Anita, my wife, and I. It was just the three of us that got started. So, look, I've been really lucky to have a very good crew. Alice Clapham has done all the traveling. You know Alice from England.
I grew up with her, yeah.
So she's done most of my traveling for the last 10 years or so. So, look, I'm incredibly fortunate to have a good team, and you really do have to have a good team, because otherwise you can't do it the way we do it.
And that means you can share in each other's success as well and enjoy that success. And those images of you and your family and your team on the winner's podium after Animal Kingdom won the Kentucky Derby in 2011 are very, very striking. I know people enjoy it, but you really enjoyed it.
I did, and it was an odd experience, because it wasn't necessarily something I had expected to do. I didn't come to this country thinking I'm going to train and I want to win the Kentucky Derby. That was something that I was fortunate enough to come into. I never set that as a goal, so I don't think I quite grasped how big an achievement it was until I got there, perhaps.
But to what extent did you then grasp the magnitude of the achievement?
Yeah, I think not till the next morning, probably, or that day. It was pretty extraordinary. I remember, we obviously taking the kids out of school to be there that weekend, and one of my son's teachers said on Monday morning, "That's the best excuse I've ever had for your son not coming back to school, is that you won the Kentucky Derby."
I hope he'd bet the horse.
No, I didn't. I mean, I've never been a betting...
No, I hope he'd done, the teacher.
The teacher, yes. Possibly. It'd be nice to think he did.
What expectations did you go into the day with?
Well, we had him stabled here at Keeneland leading up to the Derby. He'd never run on the dirt. Yeah. So Barry and I, Barry Owen, the Team Valor president, we'd always said that he had to work well on the dirt in order to run in the Derby. That was, that made sense, that we had to see how he was going to handle it. And every weekend that we tried to take him over to Churchill from Keeneland, it rained, without exception. Until the last weekend, finally we got a break in the weather. And we took him over there to work, and he worked exceptionally. Robbie Alvarado worked him, and he worked exceptionally. I remember somebody commenting that Bob Baffert had said that was the horse to beat, which kind of caught my attention.
Did it ratchet up the pressure a little bit as well when you heard him say that?
I don't know if it ratcheted up the pressure. It just made me feel like I belonged. I'd been there a few times before and hadn't necessarily felt like I belonged, but now I felt like I belonged.
And when you won the race, how much more did you feel like you belonged amongst the pantheon of Grade 1 trainers?
I don't know. I mean, I just feel incredibly lucky to have had that level of horses. I don't necessarily feel like I belong on that level. It's hard to explain. When you start training horses with the likes of Bill Martin and Bob Baffert, I mean, you have tremendous respect for those guys. I grew up watching those guys train, so it's a little bit hard to put yourself at that level.
Now, though, do you feel like you can be someone for whom younger trainers can aspire to be as a role model?
I hope so. I think we've tried to do things right. Yeah, I would like to think so.
You say you try to do things right. You've been quite outspoken in the last 2 or 3 years about some of the aspects of the industry that you think are somewhat lacking. How do you think now, we're coming to the end of 2019, which has been a challenging year for the sport, how do you think the sport is measuring up now to the challenges it faces?
Well, I think the sport is realizing the challenges it has to face, and we need to deal with them appropriately, and I think we need to catch up with the times, and I think this year has just been a real wake-up call for all of us, and hopefully the powers that be will take it to the next level, because in this day and age, there's a very high bar that we have to keep, where news travels so quickly on social media. As you know, I'm pretty active on social media. I mean, you have it at the tip of your fingers regularly, and I think social media works really well for horse racing, and I think we could even use it more.
So you actually think it could be to our advantage rather than to its detriment?
I think it could. I think it should be, yes. I really do. Because I think it's, we're a year-round sport. We have these amazing athletes, whether it's the horses or the jockeys. I think we could make so much more of it. But I do think this has been a trying year, and I think we'll come through it. I think, we're so lucky to be in this sport. Just being here at Keeneland, this is my favorite place to come to twice a year. There's nothing like it. I flew in here this morning and I hear guys on the plane talking about how excited they are to go to the races this weekend. That's neat.
I can almost sense you're getting quite emotional just about being here and about sort of being in the cradle of the thoroughbred.
Yeah, I've had some special times here at Keeneland, so it is.
Is it just the history of the place? Is it the success that you've had here?
I think, again, Keeneland do it really well, and I think we should all aspire to do it as well as they do. And, I've had some good days here. I've had a lot of fun here.
Well, for the moment, Graham Motion, thank you very much indeed. Graham Motion, and when you rejoin me in a few moments' time, I will be talking to one of the most senior veterinarians in the United States, Dr. Kathleen Anderson. Welcome back. You're watching Luck at the Cup here in the beautiful Keeneland Library. Delighted to welcome my next guest to the show, who is one of the most eminent and esteemed veterinarians in the United States, is a past president of the American Association of Equine or Equine Practitioners, if you prefer, and has been one of the pioneers of the on-call scheme that we were discussing if you were watching episode number 2 with Dr. Jeff Blair in California. She is Dr. Kathleen Anderson. Kathy, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
In what's been a very interesting, sometimes difficult year for American sport, American horse racing, and how are we addressing, as I asked Graham Motion, the challenges that are in front of us at the moment? Are we doing well, badly, and differently?
Well, I think, certainly we are challenged, and I think we are trying to look at different ways to address those challenges. I think certainly as Graham referenced, the social media piece of this makes it difficult at times because there doesn't allow us the time frame that we need to come up with the answers. And I think every time we have an incident, we have to do an investigation. We have to, make sure that we have all our facts in place so that we can actually have an actionable item at the end of the day that we can make change that will benefit the horse.
We will talk more about that in some depth
a
little later on. But take me back to where it all started for you, your relationship with this beautiful animal, the thoroughbred.
Well, I grew up in Western Canada, basically on a cattle ranch. I just loved horses my entire life. I worked with horses through eventing, jumping, went to England, spent a year there, and eventually decided that I would like to do equine medicine, which was at that time not commonly, not as it is today, a real profession for women. But fortunately, I plowed on through and I was able to do an externship in my third year in Suffolk Downs, and that's where I got to see my first great horse, which was Mom's Command, who had won the Filly Triple Crown, and with the owner, daughter team, teamed up with Ned Allard, and it seemed pretty darn simple. You just breed a horse, put your daughter on it, and win the Filly Triple Crown. So that was my introduction to top-level thoroughbred racing. It obviously hooked me well and truly, and I was able to come back the following year as a graduate and have worked my way from Suffolk Downs down the coast to Ferry Hill Training Center, where I've been since 1992.
And is it in some ways like being a trainer or an owner or a breeder or a jockey? You want to get involved with better and better horses and better racing, or do you just treat them all?
Well, you have to treat them all the same because a horse is a horse, and I've had that lesson taught to me multiple times. I mean, if you have a colic in a Grade 1 winner, it needs to be addressed the same way it would be treated in a $500 kid's pony. Mm-hmm. So certainly that aspect of it is always the same. The fun part is being on a team, being part of a truly athletic career, and being basically the sports medicine person. on that team. And so I get up every day excited to go in and see what's going to happen today.
Does it annoy you when vets as a whole get a bad rap because of the reputation that some of them have?
Absolutely, because I believe that, like everything else, there's always a few bad apples in the crate. But as a profession, we have people that have dedicated their lives to the horses, and they are just as passionate as I am. And sometimes they have the good fortune to work with wonderful horses, and sometimes they don't, but they still care, and that's what really matters.
What gives you the most satisfaction?
The most satisfaction for me is probably, there's two different ways to look at that. One is following a line. So I have now been able to take care of granddaughters, great-granddaughters, so a whole line of mares, and certainly some of the stallions. Of course, they have a much larger number of impact. Union Rags babies right now are coming in there 4, and they just continue to improve the breed, and those things are very exciting. I think the other thing is actually the individual horse coming in with a 2-year-old and saying, is this horse going to be a great horse? And you never know until they do that first race. And even then you don't always know, because sometimes they're a little green, sometimes they're a little spooky. So it doesn't always, pan out the way you planned. But I think the athletic part of this is very fun.
Do you find that the best horses are ones that need the least intervention?
That is often the case. There are exceptions. And I'm sure you're all familiar with DeHaas, who, started out with a coffin bone issue when he was a yearling, and then obviously progressed through his career, skipped a year in between Breeders' Cup wins. So that's an exception. But I think the majority of horses that are true athletes, it's an inherent ability. And often they are also, they're confident, and not always in a naughty way, but often they're very confident in what we call class. They just exude class, they're well-behaved, and they know their job, which is pretty fun.
DeHaas was trained by Michael Dickinson, who Graham has already referenced, and it has been considered the greatest Breeders' Cup training performance, certainly in...
Well, it's certainly the most unique.
In history. Yeah. And you talk about confidence in the horse, confidence in the trainer as well.
True.
A man with enormous self-belief, and with whom you've worked very closely there and elsewhere.
Yes.
Just tell me a bit about working with Michael.
Michael was totally detail-oriented, as we would expect. He came with a great deal of experience from England, which he wanted to correlate with American conditions. And in the process of doing that, I think he changed racing in America on many levels. We would not have the synthetic surfaces that are still functioning today if he hadn't pushed through on that front. I think that he certainly was intense to work with, but it was also very rewarding, and we remained good friends.
And as far as DeHaas was concerned, and getting him back for that second Breeders' Cup win, what were the key challenges?
The key challenges was that he did have an injury after the first Breeders' Cup win, so he then had time to recuperate, and then whenever you have an older horse coming back, you have to kind of balance all the bits and pieces. He's becoming a little bit arthritic. You couldn't push on him as hard as you might like to, so then you would have to have longer periods between works, and certainly did not over-race or overtrain him.
So here's the interesting point for me. You've got a horse here who ends up being a hero because he's come back from a serious injury. If the sport is moving into more risk-averse times, rightly so we might say, does that preclude a recovery like that in future, do you think?
No, I think that we actually have better technology now than we did 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whenever he was, 1998 was his second win. And I think that will, in fact, enable us to help more of those warriors return in safe conditions. And some of the technology changes that are currently happening and coming down the pike are just very exciting, which is kind of, again, why I remain very enthusiastic about my profession.
This is what I love about talking to people who are essentially scientists by profession, researchers by profession, is their enthusiasm for progression and enthusiasm for looking forward. And that, I think, is what this sport needs right now. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and I think that some of the things that we have on the horizon, such as, the biomarker research, horses can't tell us when things are changing in their body. But if we are able to do it, any biomarker needs to be accurate so that it's actually telling us the truth. It needs to be accessible, which means it needs to be stall side and available on an affordable level so that we can use it as a screening tool. It's all very well to say we'll just put this horse through an MRI. That is a very expensive, labor-intensive, and difficult process in the racehorse. It's not something that we're going to be doing across our population. However, a stall-side blood test run on a regular basis would give us, hopefully down the road, and I think this will be here before we know it. And that's the kinds of things that are going to change the game. We have the digital imaging technology to confirm those findings if we know we need to be looking. There's a very exciting project at New Bolton Center, and I know that Graham is engaged with that, where we have 2-year-olds being taken on a serial basis for standing CT radiographs, all 4 fetlocks, followed up by, and at the same time pulling blood work on those horses to be able to correlate, if possible, biomarkers with the radiographic findings and help us understand how that bone morphology is developing in the young racehorse.
Well, this sounds incredibly exciting.
It is, and it's promising, and this is where we just need to get to the other side.
So if you're doing your bit and the researchers are doing their bit getting this moved forward, what then is the responsibility on trainers?
The responsibility of trainers has always been to remain open to new ideas, to look at every horse as an individual, to be attentive to each individual as they go through the training process. And there are often horses that don't race until they're 3 because they simply aren't mature enough. And good trainers recognize that and sit tight.
And do you think the proportion of good trainers to bad is improving or not?
I think it is, and I think that, there won't be room for people who don't keep up with the program. That's the bottom line. And that, I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, I think there are lots of small trainers, 2 to 10 horse outfits that can still do very well if they embrace the future.
We talked with Dr. Blair a couple of episodes ago about the on-call scheme, which I know you were a pioneer of, and that essentially was to make our lives as broadcasters and the viewers' lives more enriched with genuine veterinary expertise. How do you think that's worked?
I think it has worked well in as much as we are able to answer the question, what's happened, what's happening now, and what will happen. And that hopefully, that little snippet of information will help to inform the American public that's watching that program. I think that we have so much potential in the program to share more information, such as what I'm talking about with you today.
Do you think in this sort of post-truth world, as we call it now, or post-fact world, we are getting enough facts out there to people, or are we just allowing a situation to develop where people are throwing all sorts of crazy opinions around?
I think there have always been crazy opinions, and I think that they may not have been as widespread as they are now, and I think social media has amplified that effect, and I think therein lies the challenge, because how do you discern between facts and fiction? And I think that's where you need people to be able to present facts and be able to sort of quantify the outcomes, if you will.
Do you still have as much affection and admiration for the sport of horse racing as you did all those years ago when you started out in it?
I do. I mean, to me, the race day is the culmination of the effort, but just as with eventing, then you go on to another race. So really, the best part is the bit in between, which is looking at these horses on a daily basis, being there throughout the process, watching them develop and go from being gawky 2-year-olds to being champion 5-year-olds. I would like to see more longevity in these horses' careers, because I think many horses leave the racehorse pool too early because of the economics of it, really. And I think that there's so much talent that we have yet to see.
Is that because you think fundamentally, if they are bred to race, they are better suited to be racing if they are fit to race than they are to?
Not better suited, but I think that, if you look back at Perfect Horses, Mucho Macho Man, he's second in the Breeders' Cup at 5. He wins it at 6. I mean, how much fun is that? I was involved with part of his career, and it was very rewarding. So there are certainly horses that, and often with the stallions, until they get that grade 1 win under their belt, they do last a little longer in the pool. Once they've got the grade 1, it's hard to sort of continue to look at what the options are. Mares will race until they're ready, but they're really only going to produce the 1 foal per year.
Were you working at Santa Anita when Mucho Macho Man won the Classic?
I was not. I was working at Fair Hill when Mucho Macho Man trained there the year before.
How difficult do you find it if you are involved with horses that are racing on that day and you are there in your official capacity to detach yourself emotionally from what's going on?
I don't find it that difficult because that's my job. I've been doing this for a long time, and part of the excitement is being able to be present but also be a professional.
Dr. Kathleen Anderson, for the moment, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And when you rejoin us, we will be rejoined by Grey Emotion. Welcome back to the third and final part of Luck at the Cup. I'm delighted to say I'm rejoined by Grey Emotion alongside Dr. Kathleen Anderson. And Graham, you were listening to Kathy there just before the break, and how inspired were you about the future of the game listening to what she had to say?
Well, I think we are. I mean, we're both at Fair Hill every day.
Yeah.
Fair Hill's an amazing place. It's kind of like going back to our roots almost, the way we do it, I guess. Sort of, we're off the track. We feel very positive at Fair Hill.
I think it just allows us possibilities. I mean, we have an idea, most times we can exercise that possibility. It's a sustainable financial model. So if we want to put in a synthetic track, we do.
There's not much we can't do at Fair Hill,
Yeah.
let's put it that way.
We can ride 5,000 acres back cross country, give these horses a break. You use that technique a lot on your program. We can breeze on the turf across the road. There's a lot of options.
So it begs the question, is moving everybody out from the tracks, from the backside, a realistic and sustainable option in due course, or not?
I don't think so. But let's take care of our facilities, the training facilities, the stables. Let's do a better job across the board of everything.
On the backsides of the existing racetracks. Is that where you'd like to see the investment fundamentally?
Yes, I would. I think it gets lost in the shuffle a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the upgrades and the infrastructure on the backside, needs a refurbish in most places.
So what needs to be done better there? When you go there with a group of horses to a lot of these tracks, I'm not expecting you to single them out, but you can if you want. What do you want to see done better?
Well, one of my biggest concerns is whenever we ship into a racetrack, we're usually just going in for the day. So we want to go into a clean, well taken care of environment, because right now, our testing in horse racing is phenomenal. It's very, very specific, very extensive. So we don't want to be running the risk of going into contaminated facilities. We want spotless, well taken care of facilities.
And they're just not passing muster at the moment, is that what you...
I don't think so. I don't think they've kept up with the times. I don't think they've kept up with our testing procedures, which these days are very good, as they should be.
Mm-hmm.
And then just from a purely health point of view, I think ventilation is a big factor. Certainly, in the barns that I visit, and I don't obviously travel nearly as much as Graham, I'm looking at, there are sort of stalls that contain dangerous elements such as nails, broken boards, just overall upkeep.
So that's absolutely crucial. That's one part of the industry that needs further investment.
And it's not that hard. I mean,
No.
that's the easy part.
Honestly, it's more about doing the little things well. We can do so much better.
And you say the testing procedures are pretty robust as they need to be. From your point of view, Kathy, is the industry getting on top of unscrupulous medication use?
That is a really tough question to answer.
I know,
And
we
the
haven't
reason
got the
is-
10 hours, unfortunately.
No, the reason is I think that there are so many people, not even in our industry, but in the world, internet chemists, we call them, trying to always get that edge. And then there's always going to be some unscrupulous person that wants that edge. But as a rule across the board, I think our testing is now gotten ahead of our practical application. I think we are trying to find that balance, and I think you'd probably agree with that in terms of contaminants, for example. You know, can we determine the difference between a horse that picked up something in a ship-in stall or something that was actually actively given to that horse?
Well, I mean, this is very much in the news at the moment with the Justify issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, those are the kinds of challenges we face. But the more important issues that we all need, is the uniformity piece. We need every state to be held to the same standard.
So why aren't they, and how can this be achieved?
I think this is something that a lot of people from outside the country don't realize, is that every time you race a horse in a different state, there are different rules. When I ship from Fairhill to Santa Anita, I will be governed under California racing rules, which will be different from the rules in Maryland. The problem is the betting. Every state has their own rules and governing bodies that they have to follow, and they set forth the medication policies. That's a big problem. And it's almost like every time you travel, you're going to a different country. And I think this is something that people don't really appreciate outside the game.
But you've both been on numerous boards and committees and think tanks and so forth. Are we getting any closer to harmonization here?
I think we are. And I think part of it is that there is a significant focus on we need to do better, just as you said. And I think, we're not there yet, but I think we're headed in the right direction.
And your medication record bears the closest scrutiny. You're widely renowned to be one of the quote-unquote, it's probably a bad word to use, cleanest trainers that there is. But do you go to races confident that you're competing on a level playing field?
Look, that's a tough one. I think, like Kathy said, there's always going to be somebody looking to take an edge. But by and large, in our profession, most people want to follow the rules. The majority of trainers want to play by the rules. There's only a very small percentage of people that are going to try and take an edge.
So why is it then that the perception of the sport here from abroad is not what it might be as regards horses being medicated? Because I've seen horses medicated perfectly legitimately in Britain, France, Ireland, Germany, Australia, Japan, Hong Kong, etc.
Yeah.
Why should it be any different?
Why should the
Why should the
perception
perception
be
be
different?
any? Yeah. Is it just the Lasix thing?
Maybe, but if it is, that's a pretty red herring. I mean, that's really not the focus of illicit medication, which we're talking about taking an edge with. But as far as your question, why is the perception different? I honestly can't answer it because I've not been out of the country for racing purposes.
I don't think we do a good job of making decisions like the Justify decision. This should have been dealt with immediately. Why has it been drug out? Why has it been covered up? This should have been handled. It was a very simple, straightforward situation. We just don't do a good job of policing ourselves, making the right decisions, realizing when there's an issue with contamination. I think you hear about so much over here because everything's
Amplified.
handled poorly, really. It needs to be handled so much better. We need somebody that oversees it that's going to handle it in a better way.
So again, we're on the same issue as if you want harmonization of medication regulation across the country, you want someone who's also in charge of presumably all the public relations for all the regulation issues across the country.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I take issue with is that it's always about the medication, and I think that uniformity, that what we're talking about, applies to so much more, and it applies to the jockeys, it applies to all of the rules that are different state to state. So I think harmonization uniformity, all of those things definitely need to be the goal. And I think to a person that I speak to, that is a very well accepted goal.
Does it ever worry you, Kathy, that if enough of the big tracks support and sustain some sort of uniformity, that some of the smaller tracks who perhaps don't sign up to that will become essentially ghettoized and, areas and havens for real serious animal welfare issues?
So what I worry about is exactly the bottom line there, which is I worry about the horses. And so to me, I'm very fortunate. I work with a lot of very nice horses, but I have worked with a lot of horses that have, run for 1,500, run for 5,000, run for 15,000, the claiming horses. And those make up 70% of our racing base. And they need the protection that we offer to all horses, the same.
So how do we give them that?
We give them that through uniformity.
But we need to find a way of getting all those tracks, for example, to sign up to the databases telling us about injuries and fatalities.
And I think if you look at the numbers, again, it's been a long process, but I think that's coming. I think, frankly, mandating it is the way to go on that front.
And there have been big improvements. I mean, the Mid-Atlantic have come together and tried to get together a uniform medication policy, which is a huge step for us. There's a Horse Racing Integrity Act, which is up before Congress, which, maybe that's what we need. If we can't handle it ourselves, somebody's got to take the reins for us because we need to do a better job.
So I was at the Mid-Atlantic meeting yesterday, the regulatory meeting. We had 11 racetracks represented, 7 racing jurisdictions. And, bottom line is everyone was able to agree on the principles for that. NSAIDs at 48 hours, joint injections at 14 days, those types of things that we're looking to make uniform. So that's one racing jurisdiction, which represents a significant number of racehorses in the United States. So if we can just spread that umbrella a little broader, maybe we'll be there.
This is a new concept to get any groups to agree on anything in horse racing.
But the Mid-Atlantic has done it for several years, and they've done a good job.
Huge step. I mean, Alan Foreman's been a big proponent of this, and he's taken tremendous strides in doing it.
I know an area that you're both extremely passionate about is not rehabilitating racehorses, but finding other careers for them. Mm-hmm. And you're in a great area for it as well. It's a fantastic equestrian area. And your background in eventing, and Graham, I know that your wife Anita's got many other equestrian interests. Is that something you feel we're getting better at across the country?
100%. We've made leaps and bounds, and we should. We shouldn't really be patting ourselves on the back, but we have come so far in finding other careers for horses. Things have changed so dramatically in the last 5 years. There are so many good groups out there that are taking care of horses when their racing careers are over. I mean, most horses, they run till they're 5 or 6 years old, if you're lucky. A lot of them live till they're 30, so there's a big gap there where they need to be taken care of. And like you say, my wife has become a huge proponent for it. We just recently had the Real Rider Cup right there at Fair Hill, where celebrities from within racing rode, from any branch of racing, rode retired racehorses, which was really a great event. I think we raised over $50,000. I say we, my wife handled it herself single-handedly pretty much, with a little help. But, we have come so far in this with the TAA, the TCA. There are so many groups out there that are doing a great job finding jobs for these retired racehorses.
Well, and I think public awareness has really improved. So people are actually looking for OTTBs, off-the-track thoroughbreds, and seeking them out for all kinds of disciplines.
And I think on a related point, maybe something we didn't touch on before, was the extent to which research, because the thoroughbred racing industry exists, helps the horse and all horses.
Yeah, absolutely. Orthopedics, respiratory, colics, all those thoroughbreds that can afford those surgeries then paved the way for new techniques and improved, medicine across the board in all horses. So racing has a huge footprint, much bigger than the actual racetrack.
It bears a big weight on its shoulders and a big responsibility, and we all have that collective responsibility.
Yes.
It is. I think we've gotten so much better too, as whereas 10, 15 years ago, when a horse's form started trailing off, perhaps you just looked for a lesser claiming race for the horse. I think nowadays that's almost an afterthought. I think a lot of people are thinking, maybe this horse needs a new career, and that's a good thing.
And I think owners are thinking that too. You have those conversations. At what point would you like to retire this horse? That's a conversation now. That was never a conversation.
100%.
Graham, you've got children who are just going into the workplace now. Would you encourage either of them to adopt horse racing as a career?
Unfortunately, neither one of them have much interest, but they like to show up on the big days. But look, there's a bright future for racing. We just need to do the small things better. We need to value our jockeys and our horses, who are amazing athletes. We just need to do things better and get ahead of ourselves. We need someone to help us with getting a better image out there, because it's a great sport. You see racing here at Keeneland these next few weeks. It's a spectacle.
I think that is a perfect note on which to leave it. Dr. Kathleen Anderson, Graham Motion, thank you both very much indeed. I hope you've enjoyed that as much as I have. Next time on Luck at the Cup, continuing the slightly Anglo theme, I hope you're not getting bored with it. Jockey Sophie Doyle, fresh from her first Grade 1 winner, and Jerry Bailey, all-time legend and Hall of Famer. That's up next. I hope you've enjoyed this edition. Bye-bye.